The sun was starting its late afternoon descent when Jacob Henderson, a bright-eyed 9-year-old with mild autism, carefully set up his foldable desk in the shared hallway of Greenwood Towers, a mid-range condominium complex in the suburbs of a mid-sized American city. The building's interior hallways were softly lit by overhead lamps, but Jacob liked to place his desk near a large window at the end of the corridor, where natural light still streamed in. The table was small, sized perfectly for his homework folder, a pencil case, and a piece of scratch paper for practicing math problems. This hallway spot had become Jacob's impromptu study area for a simple reason. At home, the living room was too noisy in the evenings, filled with the clanking of dinner prep and the hum of the TV. His bedroom often overwhelmed him, visual distractions, toys, and stuffed animals making it hard for him to focus. The hallway, though unusual, offered a calm space bathed in daylight. Neighbors came and went, but seldom lingered. On this particular evening, Jacob was working on basic arithmetic, his small hand guiding a pencil across a lined page. Every so often, he paused to rock gently in his seat, an unconscious, self-soothing motion that helped him concentrate. Aside from the muffled chatter of neighbors behind closed doors, the corridor was peaceful. Just then, an elevator dinged, and out stepped Constance Adler, a middle-aged woman known, privately, as Karen by many residents. Constance had short, expertly styled hair and wore business-casual attire. Her expression, perpetually pinched, suggested she was never quite satisfied with the way things operated around her. Observing the boy at his desk, Constance slowed her pace, lips pressed into a thin line. To her, the hallway was not a place for children to sprawl out with personal effects. She paused, cleared her throat, and stared down at Jacob, whose head was bent intently over his workbook. When he failed to notice her, she spoke in a clipped voice. "Young man, do you live in this building?" Startled, Jacob looked up, blinking behind his round glasses. "Yes, ma'am. I'm on the 3rd floor." He nodded toward a door labeled 3C. "I just do my homework here sometimes." His voice was polite, a little quiet. Constance's frown deepened. "We have rules about leaving personal items in common spaces. Are you aware of that?" Jacob hesitated, unsure what to say. He'd never heard of such a rule, and his mother, Lydia Henderson, had assured him it was fine as long as he kept the space clear. No, I guess not," he admitted. Constance sniffed, glancing disapprovingly at the desk's metal legs and the small stack of papers. "Well, you shouldn't block the hallway. Someone might trip." In truth, Jacob's compact desk was tucked neatly against the wall, leaving plenty of room for foot traffic. But faced with Constance's stern glare, he offered a timid, "Okay," and gathered a few of his papers, worrying that he might be in trouble. Constance didn't linger. She turned on her heel, muttering that she would bring this up with the HOA, then marched off. Jacob exhaled, shoulders tense. He wasn't sure if she was truly upset or just being abrupt. Either way, he decided to pack up early, anxious about any further confrontation. Little did he know, this brief exchange marked the start of a more dramatic showdown in Greenwood Towers, one that would transform not only his study habits, but also the entire community. Later that evening, back in Unit 3C, Jacob sat at the dining table, finishing the last of his arithmetic under his mother's watchful eye. The condo was modest but warm, a rented 2-bedroom Lydia had chosen for its decent price and relatively family-friendly environment. Soft music played from a small radio on the kitchen counter. A pot of spaghetti sauce simmered on the stove. Lydia noticed Jacob's anxious glances toward the door. "Is everything all right, sweetie?" she asked, gently brushing a stray curl from his forehead. She had a friendly face, and though she often wore a tired expression, being a single mother to a child with special needs demanded energy, she always tried to project calm reassurance. Jacob sighed. "A lady in the hallway told me I might be breaking the rules. She said something about the HOA not allowing personal items in common areas." He paused. "I was just doing homework." Frowning, Lydia set down her wooden spoon. "You're not blocking anything. It's just a small desk against the wall." "Did she say who she was?" Jacob shrugged. "She had short hair and wore a name tag." Her voice was kinda angry. Lydia nodded slowly. She suspected it was Constance Adler, the HOA's newly minted compliance coordinator, someone who had taken on the role with more zeal than diplomacy. They'd exchanged a few emails in the past about minor issues, like Lydia's doormat, which was apparently too bright for the hallway's aesthetic, but had never directly clashed. "Don't worry," Lydia said softly, giving Jacob's shoulder a comforting squeeze. "You're not harming anything. If she complains, I'll talk to the board. You deserve a quiet place to study." Jacob bit his lip. "Okay, Mom." He tried to concentrate on the last math problem, but the memory of Constance's sharp tone lingered. For Jacob, who already grappled with sensory sensitivities and mild social anxiety, unfriendly encounters stuck in his mind. Despite Lydia's reassurance, he feared that simply doing his homework outside his door had become a violation in someone's eyes. That night, as Jacob drifted off to sleep, he clutched one of his plush toys for comfort. Meanwhile, Lydia resolved to keep an eye on the situation. She trusted her son's calm routine in the hallway wasn't truly against any official guideline. Yet in communities with a strict HOA presence, any complaint could spiral into a bigger issue. Little did she realize how far Constance Adler would push this matter, and how dramatically the neighbors would respond. Constance Adler, despite being in her early 50s, was one of the newest residents of Greenwood Towers. She had moved in a mere 6 months prior after securing a job as an administrative manager at a local real estate firm. With her background in property management, Constance felt she was uniquely qualified to improve the living environment of Greenwood Towers. She managed to get herself voted onto the HOA board, at least partly because other residents didn't want to volunteer, leaving seats vacant. Almost immediately, Constance took on the role of compliance coordinator. She read the building's rules meticulously, then began posting notices about minor infractions, door wreaths that exceeded size limits, footwear left in hallways, bicycles leaning against railings. Most neighbors found it irritating but tolerated her fussiness. They whispered about Karen, a not-so-kind nickname referencing her controlling nature and eagerness to speak to the manager about trivial matters. In her mind, Constance was upholding standards. She believed strongly in cleanliness, uniformity, and a certain hush that befitted a residential building. She disliked children playing in common areas, or neighbors chatting in doorways, or any sign of disorder. So when she discovered a child setting up a desk in the hallway, to her, it represented the start of a slippery slope. What if every child did the same? She asked herself. Soon the halls might be filled with scattered papers, crayons, half-eaten snacks. Constance would not let Greenwood Towers degenerate. A few days after her initial run-in with Jacob, Constance typed an email to the HOA board. Subject: Hallway obstruction complaint. Dear board members, I wish to report that a tenant, a minor, has been using a foldable desk in the third-floor hallway. This is a clear violation of our building's policy against leaving personal belongings or furniture in common areas. It also poses a tripping hazard. I recommend we issue a formal warning and consider fines if non-compliance continues. Sincerely, Constance Adler, Compliance Coordinator. She sent it off with a self-satisfied click, certain the board would back her stance. After all, she had made it her mission to enforce the rules. Little did she anticipate the board's mixed reception. While some might side with her, others would question whether the desk was truly a problem, especially if it helped a special needs child focus on homework. But Constance's nature left no room for compromise. In her worldview, rules were rules. For a few days, Jacob avoided the hallway altogether, shaken by the uncertain reception. He tried working at the kitchen table, but found himself easily distracted by the whir of the dishwasher or the crackling of frying pans. Still, he persevered with Lydia's help. Together, they tackled reading assignments, practicing phonics aloud. While it was manageable, Lydia noticed that Jacob seemed more restless than usual. He fidgeted incessantly and lost focus every few minutes. On the third evening, however, Jacob timidly asked, "Mom, can I try the hallway again tonight? I really like the lighting there." Lydia considered. She hadn't heard anything from the HOA about a formal complaint, and she doubted the building's rules truly outlawed a small foldable desk. Sure, Lydia relented with a gentle smile. But let's keep an ear out, just in case. If Constance or anyone else says something, I'll talk to them. With that, mother and son ventured into the corridor. Lydia set up a second chair for herself, planning to remain close by for moral support. Jacob seemed relieved. The overhead fluorescents in the hallway were supplemented by a large window at the far end. As the evening sun filtered in, Jacob visibly relaxed into his routine. He scribbled math answers, occasionally glancing at passers-by with a shy smile. Most neighbors greeted him warmly, unbothered by the presence of the small desk. Encouraged by the largely positive or neutral reactions, Lydia believed that Constance might have dropped the matter. Indeed, for that entire evening, there was no sign of the officious neighbor. Jacob finished his homework in peace, and the two packed up, returning to Unit 3C. It felt like a small victory, the notion that maybe, just maybe, the building's Karen had bigger fish to fry. Yet this lull was short-lived. Constance was not one to let things slide. She was merely gathering ammunition for her next confrontation, spurred on by the notion that inconsistent enforcement of rules would undermine her credibility. The calm would break soon enough, in a startling and dramatic fashion. A week later, near the end of the month, Greenwood Towers bustled with activity. Residents carried groceries, kids chattered about upcoming school events, and the elevators saw more foot traffic as people brought out trash or prepared for errands. Jacob was again set up in the hallway, focusing on a reading comprehension worksheet about historical figures. Lydia was inside the condo, tidying up. Jacob felt old enough to handle a short study session alone, as long as he was just outside their door. He was engrossed in a paragraph about Harriet Tubman when he heard the familiar click of sharp heels on the hallway's floor. Glancing up, Jacob's chest tightened at the sight of Constance Adler marching toward him, lips pressed in disapproval. He lowered his gaze, trying to maintain concentration, but Constance's voice cut through the silence. "You again," she snapped. "I thought I made it clear this was unacceptable." Jacob swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I'm just finishing my reading. I'll clean up after." Constance halted just inches from the desk, arms folded across her chest. "The board will be issuing a notice soon," she warned. "We can't have you turning these corridors into personal study halls." Jacob tried to steady his trembling voice. "I'm not hurting anyone. I only sit here for a short time." Constance's eyes narrowed. "That's what they all say? Next thing we know, we'll have a daycare of kids playing in the halls." At that moment, Lydia, hearing raised voices, stepped into the corridor. "Is there a problem?" she asked, tone polite but edged with protectiveness. Constance raised her chin. "Yes, there is. I've warned you both before. Your son can't leave this desk here. It's not within his rights to occupy common space for personal use." Lydia frowned. "He's not leaving it. He takes it back inside when he's done. And he's never in anyone's way." They locked eyes. Constance glared with an intensity that made Lydia's stomach clench. Then, in a move that would soon reverberate through the building, Constance snapped, "If you won't remove it, I will," and kicked the foldable desk's metal leg. The desk toppled sideways in a sudden crash. Textbooks and worksheets spilled across the floor. Jacob let out a startled cry, tears springing to his eyes. He scrambled to gather his scattered papers, heart pounding. Lydia gasped, stepping forward to pull the desk upright. "What are you doing?" she nearly shouted at Constance. Constance flicked her hand dismissively. "I warned you. Next time, keep your personal items inside your unit." Her tone was cold, unwavering. Neighbors, drawn by the noise, began opening their doors or peeking around corners. Among them was an older gentleman, Mr. Blakely, who watched with a horrified expression. Another neighbor, Tasha Woods, came running with concern. As Jacob struggled to pick up his trembling pile of papers, the sight of him nearly in tears spurred Tasha to snap at Constance. "That's a child's desk. You didn't need to do that." Constance turned away, looking rattled by the sudden group attention. "I'm enforcing the building's policies," she declared, though her voice faltered slightly under the weight of so many disapproving stares. Then she stomped off toward the elevator, leaving a shaken hallway in her wake. It took Jacob several minutes to calm down, aided by Lydia's soothing whispers. Tasha helped pick up the rest of the scattered schoolwork. By the time they finished, Jacob was fighting tears. Lydia's face was set in an expression of anger she rarely showed. "That woman has gone too far," Tasha murmured, passing Jacob his last sheet of reading comprehension. "We should do something." Lydia nodded, voice quivering with barely contained fury. "I will. No one gets away with attacking my son like that." Little did they know, the story of Karen flipping a special needs child's desk would spread through Greenwood Towers and stir a wave of neighborly outrage that would soon transform the building's approach to communal spaces. Once inside Unit 3C, Lydia kneeled to check if Jacob was hurt. Physically, he was unscathed. Only the desk bore a slight dent where Constance's foot had struck it. But emotionally, he was rattled. He stared numbly at his scattered worksheets, tears glistening on his cheeks. "It's going to be all right," Lydia said softly, wrapping her arm around his shoulders. "You did nothing wrong. She's the one who acted horribly." Jacob's head nodded slightly, but his eyes remained downcast. Over the next hour, word of the incident spread among neighbors who had witnessed it or heard the commotion. Some texted one another, outraged that an adult would physically knock over a child's desk. Others posted in the building's private social media group, describing the confrontation in detail. It quickly became clear that Constance Adler had crossed a line. By evening, Tasha Woods and Mr. Blakely dropped by to check on Jacob. Tasha, carrying a plate of homemade cookies, gave the boy a gentle smile. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. We're all on your side." Mr. Blakely, a retired teacher, patted Jacob's shoulder. "You remind me of some of my students, so hardworking. Don't let one mean person keep you from studying in peace, all right?" Jacob managed a small, grateful smile. Their kindness helped ease the hurt, though the memory of Constance's furious face still haunted him. Lydia assured them that she intended to file a formal complaint against Constance with the HOA. "We can't let bullying slide," she said firmly. Outside the door, in the hallway where the incident had occurred, a noticeable tension lingered. Neighbors passing by whispered about Karen's meltdown. Some speculated she might face repercussions from the board. Others assumed she'd dig in her heels, claiming she was within her rights. Meanwhile, Jacob lay awake that night, replaying the crash in his mind, trembling each time he recalled the sound of the desk hitting the floor. Lydia spent hours drafting an email to the HOA. She included details of the confrontation, emphasizing Jacob's mild autism and how essential it was for him to have a low-distraction environment. She demanded an apology from Constance and insisted the board address the matter. It was, after all, a form of harassment, potentially even assault. Lydia's fury was tempered only by her resolve to keep Jacob's life stable. She did not want a protracted legal battle unless absolutely necessary, but nor would she stand by and watch him suffer. That night, as storms rolled outside, Greenwood Tower's hallways were quiet. But behind closed doors, many residents read the flurry of messages on their phones, hearts heavy with empathy for Jacob and scorn for Constance. A sense of moral indignation spread, a feeling that something had to change, that a child's comfort and education should never be threatened by an overzealous neighbor. The following week, the HOA board scheduled an emergency session to discuss the incident. Constance herself was part of the board, holding the compliance coordinator title, but that did not grant her immunity from scrutiny. 3 other board members, Linda Hooper, president, Gavin Tsai, treasurer, and Marcia Patel, secretary, arrived early to review the relevant policies. They had also received Lydia's detailed email, along with statements from Tasha Woods, Mr. Blakely, and other neighbors who witnessed or heard about the confrontation. When Constance entered the board's meeting room, she offered a curt nod, dropping a folder of printed documents onto the table. She attempted to start the session with a confident tone. "We have a pressing matter regarding hallway obstructions." Linda Hooper cut her off gently but firmly. "Actually, Constance, we're here to address the complaint filed by Ms. Henderson about your behavior toward her child. We can discuss hallway regulations afterward, but that's not the main focus right now." Constance's expression darkened. "I see." She folded her arms, bracing for a confrontation. As far as she was concerned, the hallway rules were paramount, and that child's desk was indeed an infraction. She planned to present the relevant bylines from the building's manual. But Linda, Gavin, and Marcia seemed disinclined to see it her way. They read passages from Lydia's email aloud, describing how Constance had kicked over the boy's desk, scattering his homework. They also cited testimonies from neighbors. Constance interjected multiple times with half-hearted excuses. "It was an accident," or "I barely touched it." He's exaggerating. But the board was not convinced. The eyewitnesses' accounts were consistent, and nobody believed the child had spontaneously flipped his own desk. Finally, Linda Hooper said, "We do have a rule about not storing items in common areas. But a child using a small foldable desk for an hour isn't the same as leaving bikes or furniture in the hallway permanently." And from what we see, that desk wasn't obstructing traffic. Moreover, the bigger issue is you physically toppling it while the child was present. That's unacceptable. Constance bristled. As compliance coordinator, I am responsible for enforcing guidelines. If the parent refused to remove it, I had to take action. Gavin Tsai shook his head. Taking action doesn't mean forcibly knocking over a desk and scaring a child, especially one with special needs. We can't condone that. Marsha Patel nodded. We might propose clarifying the hallway rule so everyone knows what's acceptable. But punishing a kid doing homework quietly doesn't feel right. And physically flipping the desk, Constance, that's not enforcement, that's aggression. Constance's cheeks flushed. She opened her folder, brandishing a printed copy of the building's regulation. Section 2.3 states, no personal objects, including furniture, shall be placed in common areas for extended use. This child was studying daily in the hallway. That qualifies as extended use. Linda Hooper exchanged a glance with the other board members, then sighed. We will review that clause. However, I see no reason a short-term setup for homework is a violation if it doesn't impede movement or safety. Even if you believed it was, your response was disproportionate. We're going to ask you to issue a formal apology to Ms. Henderson and her son. Also, we recommend you step back from compliance duties regarding children's matters. Your approach has caused a lot of distress in the building. Constance stiffened, an angry retort on her lips. But Linda raised a hand. This is the board's decision. If you refuse to comply, we may revisit your position on the board altogether. In that moment, Constance realized she was cornered. She might grumble about principles or rules, but the board had spoken. Their condemnation of her actions was clear. She left the meeting simmering with resentment. If the board wouldn't fully back her stance, she intended to double down in other ways. Perhaps she could find a new angle, a new rule to exploit. She refused to concede that a child's desk in the hallway might be permissible. In the aftermath of the emergency board session, two things became evident. The board was reluctant to penalize Lydia or Jacob. They saw the desk use as a minor matter, overshadowed by Constance's aggressive behavior. While Constance was admonished, she refused to issue a genuine apology or show real contrition. Unwilling to let her son remain in the crosshairs, Lydia explored alternatives. One idea, suggested by Tasha Woods, was creating a shared study nook in an underutilized part of the building, such as near the laundry room on the first floor or in a small corner lounge that rarely saw foot traffic. If the building offered a designated space, similar to a mini common area lounge that some condos had, Jacob and potentially other children could do homework there without any question of obstructing hallways. The notion caught on quickly among neighbors. Many recalled times they or their children needed a quiet spot outside their condo unit. Some spoke of cramped living rooms or roommates who played loud music. A neutral space for studying or reading appealed to them. A few days later, Tasha pitched the idea in the building's online forum. Community Study Nook Proposal. Neighbors. After recent events regarding a child's homework desk in the hallway, some of us think Greenwood Towers might benefit from a small study nook in a shared but low-traffic area, maybe near the laundry facilities or the ground floor lounge. We'd add seating, better lighting, and a bulletin board for homework tips. This would be open to any resident. Thoughts? Responses poured in. I love this idea. My team struggles with focusing in our condo. Yes, my neighbor's kid would definitely use it. Let's do it. We can keep it neat with posted rules about quiet hours. Of course, not everyone was enthusiastic. A handful of comments, likely from Constance's allies or from those worried about cost, questioned the feasibility. But overall support was strong. The next step was to present it at the upcoming monthly HOA meeting. In the meantime, Lydia felt a glimmer of hope. If a communal study nook existed, Jacob wouldn't have to endure the hallway, and he could still find the calm, well-lit environment he needed. In parallel, some neighbors privately rallied around Jacob's cause, fueling a sense of unity. They remembered how Constance had physically flipped the desk. Many believed the building needed a show of empathy and solidarity. Mr. Blakely, the retired teacher, even volunteered to tutor any child who used the future study nook, offering help with reading or math if parents requested it. The environment in Greenwood Towers seemed poised for transformation, driven partly by outrage at Karen's cruelty. While the study nook proposal gained traction, Constance Adler seethed. She saw neighbors discussing it in the halls, overheard them praising the idea. In her mind, it meant the building was coddling children and ignoring the integrity of shared spaces. Worse, it suggested that her attempt to enforce the hallway rule had backfired dramatically. One afternoon, Constance confronted Linda Hooper outside the mailroom. This so-called study nook plan, who is funding it? Are we just letting random people bring in desks and chairs to the laundry area? Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Linda calmly explained that a few residents had volunteered to donate or repurpose some small tables and chairs. The board would likely chip in funds for improved lighting. It's not going to be chaotic, Linda reassured. We'll have guidelines, quiet hours, cleanliness rules. Actually, we think it could be a nice amenity. Constance shook her head, disbelief etched on her face. This is ridiculous. Next, we'll have teenagers hanging out all night, leaving soda cans. It's a slippery slope. Linda didn't budge. We have an oversight committee. No different than the lounge area in some buildings. This is just a smaller version, oriented to study or quiet reading. Enough neighbors want it that the board is inclined to approve. Realizing she was outnumbered, Constance stormed off, determined to sabotage the plan. She posted several printed notices in the lobby and elevators, warning that a study nook would lead to noise and clutter. She even tried to mention potential liability issues if a child got hurt. However, these notices were quickly removed by other residents, and the board clarified that no official statement had been issued from them. In frustration, Constance retreated to her condo, fuming over how quickly the community had turned on her. She typed a scathing letter to the board, threatening to resign if they approved the nook. But upon rereading, she realized resigning would mean losing all influence. Instead, she sent a more measured complaint, urging the board to reconsider the ramifications and uphold building standards. Yet even that email carried less weight now. Her credibility had plummeted after the desk-flipping incident. The tide was unmistakably turning in Lydia's favor. Over the next 2 weeks, a small committee of residents, led by Tasha Woods, Mr. Blakely, and Lydia Henderson, began planning the details of the communal study nook. They surveyed a few potential spots and settled on a little alcove near the laundry room. It had decent overhead lights, was out of the main traffic flow, and offered enough floor space for a couple of small desks plus a bookshelf or two. They pitched the concept in a neat outline to the HOA. Furniture and layout: 2 or 3 small tables, each with a pair of chairs, along the wall. A soft rug to dampen sound. Lighting: bright LED overhead fixtures. The old bulb was dim. Possibly a standing lamp or desk lamps. Storage and decor: a narrow bookshelf or cubby for reference materials, coloring books for younger kids, and a homework helper, bulletin board where neighbors could post math tips, reading lists, or friendly encouragement. Rules: quiet hours from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., no loud music, keep area tidy, respect others studying. Volunteers pledged donations. Tasha had a spare bookcase in her garage. Mr. Blakely offered an old but functional desk lamp. The Feldman family in 2B had a small table they no longer used. Lydia contributed a box of children's books. Excitement grew as neighbors realized they could build something helpful without significant cost. During a preliminary walkthrough, Jacob accompanied his mother. Stepping into the laundry room alcove, he ran his hand along the wall, imagining a desk there. The hum of washers and dryers might exist, but it was a soft background noise, less distracting than a loud living room or a busy corridor. Jacob smiled shyly. "It's nice here," he whispered. Lydia's heart lifted at the sight of his cautious optimism. A communal space might truly be the perfect compromise. Of course, Constance kept her eye on these developments. Each time she passed the laundry area, she scowled at the small group taking measurements or discussing paint colors for the bulletin board. She tried to corner Mr. Blakely one day, muttering about waste of resources. He responded politely but firmly. "Better a small study spot than a child's desk kicked over in the hallway, don't you think?" Constance's cheeks flushed red, and she retreated, feeling the sting of her own misdeed thrown back at her. At the monthly HOA meeting, held in a spare conference room on the ground floor, attendance soared. People were curious about this study nook proposal and the formal discussion of hallway usage. Lydia arrived early, accompanied by Jacob, though she planned to let him wait in the corridor with Tasha if the meeting became too heated. Constance arrived with a stack of papers and her usual tight-lipped expression. Linda Hooper convened the session. After routine updates, landscaping, elevator maintenance, budgets, the floor opened for the Study Nook initiative. Tasha gave a concise presentation, showing sketches of the proposed layout and explaining how donated furniture would keep costs minimal. She ended by emphasizing the positive impact on families and children like Jacob, who needed a quiet place. A wave of supportive claps filled the room. Then Constance stepped up, clearing her throat. "I have concerns," she announced, voice clipped. "First, is it truly the HOA's responsibility to provide a specialized study space? Second, how will we control noise or ensure it doesn't become a hangout for rowdy kids?" Linda nodded. "Good questions. Tasha, do you want to address them?" Tasha responded calmly. "We'll establish quiet hours, say 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., and post rules like no disruptive behavior. It'll be a small space, 2 or 3 desks, so it won't invite large gatherings. Also, neighbors want it, so we'll self-regulate. Anyone causing a disturbance can be reported to the board." Another board member, Marsha Patel, chimed in, "I think it's an excellent idea." And about responsibility, many HOAs invest in communal amenities, reading lounges, small fitness rooms, or libraries. This isn't unusual. It can raise the building's appeal. A smattering of applause rose again. Constance bristled. "But if we set a precedent for a study nook, what's next? A music practice corner? A playroom? We only have so much communal space." Linda offered a diplomatic smile. "We can handle future proposals case by case. Right now, we're talking about a single nook, occupant-funded for the most part. The HOA's costs are minimal, just some new lighting and perhaps a fresh coat of paint." It was clear from the murmurs that the majority supported the plan. Gavin Tsai, the treasurer, stated that the budget for the improved lighting was modest and feasible. Constance tried to rally support for limiting the nook's hours or imposing a fee, but found little traction. The board ultimately voted to approve the project with a straightforward motion, receiving an overwhelming majority yes. Constance's face tightened, and she refused to clap. Meanwhile, Jacob, seated quietly by the door, caught his mother's eye and offered a shy grin. Lydia gave him a discreet thumbs up. The communal study nook was officially a go, a new chapter in Greenwood Towers that might overshadow the negativity of the hallway incident. With the HOA's blessing secured, volunteers mobilized over the next week. They cleared out a stack of old boxes from the laundry alcove, repainted the walls a soothing pale green, and installed a bulletin board titled Homework Helper. Tasha put up a few motivational quotes, such as "Learning is growing" and "Ask about our tutoring volunteers." Mr. Blakely positioned the donated desks and chairs. One table sat against the wall, facing outward so that a student could see anyone entering. The second was tucked closer to the laundry machines, but still out of direct foot traffic. A corner lamp cast warm light, supplementing the overhead fixture. Lydia and Jacob arranged donated books on a small shelf, a mix of children's literature, educational magazines, and a dictionary. A plastic bin labeled crayons and markers sat atop the shelf, inviting younger kids to color if they finished homework early. Neighbors who passed by peeked inside, offering encouraging words. One mother of a middle schooler said, "This is such a great idea. I can't wait to have my son do his group project here instead of crowding our tiny living room." Another resident, an older woman named Harriet, dropped off a set of math flashcards she found in her attic. Each contribution built a sense of community, a shared investment in making Greenwood Towers more welcoming. Throughout the process, Constance lurked in the background, offering no help. She occasionally muttered about stray crayons on the floor or potential fire hazards, but her complaints fell on deaf ears. The board had already approved the nook, and her track record of hostility left her with little influence. Finally, after a few days of setup, the study nook was ready for use. Lydia hesitated at first to bring Jacob there, fearing Constance might find some excuse to sabotage it. But the consensus was that this space was for everyone. So, on a Monday evening, Jacob ventured down, foldable desk left behind in 3C. He selected a seat near the corner lamp, spreading out his math workbook. Within moments, he was engrossed, pencil scratching quietly. The gentle hum of laundry machines was less distracting than the echoing corridor. Tasha and another neighbor's daughter sat at the adjacent desk, working on vocabulary flashcards. Observing her son from the doorway, Lydia felt a swell of gratitude toward the neighbors who had made this possible. She still burned with anger at how Constance had treated Jacob, but seeing him comfortable, safe, and accepted eased that pain. Perhaps, Lydia thought, something beautiful had emerged from an ugly incident. The building was embracing a communal spirit that overshadowed one neighbor's negativity. Despite the communal warmth, Constance hadn't given up. She might have lost the official vote, but she remained determined to prove that turning the laundry alcove into a study nook would cause problems. She roamed the building in the evenings, searching for any sign of misbehavior or rule-breaking. If she found even a candy wrapper on the floor, she snapped a photo. If she spotted kids chatting too loudly, she made notes in her ledger. One evening, she marched down to the nook and found two preteens giggling over a YouTube video on a tablet. Constance seized the moment. "No electronics allowed. This is a quiet study space," she barked. Even though the posted rules only forbade loud noise, not technology usage for homework or research. The startled kids quickly turned the volume down. Constance left, triumphant, believing she'd uncovered proof of the nook's downfall. She compiled these minor violations into a lengthy email, attaching photos of a single crayon on the floor, a half-empty soda can in a trash bin, and a snapshot of the preteens with their tablet. In large, bold letters, she wrote, "Subject: Chronic misuse of the new study nook. Fellow board members, I regret to inform you that the so-called study nook has already devolved into a place of disruption and mess. Attached are photographic examples of repeated disregard for cleanliness and noise regulations. We must rescind this failed experiment before it further tarnishes Greenwood Towers. Regards, Constance Adler, Compliance Coordinator." But the board's reaction was lukewarm. Linda Hooper replied with a short message. "Thank you for the updates, Constance. We'll monitor the situation, but a single soda can in the trash does not constitute a major breach. As for tablet usage, that's permissible as long as volume is low, which it seems the kids complied with after you pointed it out. Please keep me posted on any serious issues." Fuming, Constance realized her strategy had gained no traction. The nook continued to flourish. More children discovered it, and even a few adults found it a quiet corner to read the newspaper. Jacob thrived there. His anxiety over hallway confrontations eased. The day after Constance's email, Mr. Blakely even posted a schedule of tutoring times, offering help in math or language arts. It was a gentle act of defiance, a sign that the building fully embraced this resource. Realizing her final attempt to undermine the nook had failed, Constance faced a harsh reality. Her authority had waned. Residents openly called her Karen behind her back. The board had effectively sidelined her voice. She was left stewing in her condo, forced to watch from a distance as the study nook experiment became a shining example of Greenwood Towers' new communal spirit. Meanwhile, the newly established nook took on a life of its own. Residents began calling it the shared learning space, bringing donations of books, educational magazines, and even a small rack for crayons and markers. The Homework Helper bulletin board displayed helpful resources, like local library events, free online math tutorials, and lists of recommended reading for each grade level. On weekends, Mr. Blakely sat for an hour or two, ready to assist any child who needed extra help. Jacob became a regular fixture. Even if he had just 10 minutes of reading homework, he preferred to do it there. The subtle hum of the washing machines, the overhead lights, and the quiet camaraderie of neighbors working on their tasks allowed him to concentrate better than in his own living room. His mother noticed an improvement in his grades and a boost in his confidence. Lydia also appreciated the supportive environment. She chatted with other parents, forming new friendships and swapping tips about educational tools for kids with special needs. Word spread beyond children's homework, too. A couple of college students in the building found it a convenient spot for late-night study sessions, headphones on as they typed papers. An elderly neighbor used the desk to work on crossword puzzles, joking that she'd share her answers in exchange for interesting conversation. The sense of unity that blossomed in Greenwood Towers was palpable. People who had barely exchanged greetings in the elevator before were now discussing everything from advanced algebra to best-selling novels in that little nook. The tension from Constance's tyranny receded into the background, replaced by a collective pride in this new amenity. In an ironic twist, neighbors often cited the desk-flipping incident as the catalyst for such positive change. If she hadn't done that, we never would have created this space, they said. Through it all, Constance retreated from the social scene of Greenwood Towers. She no longer walked the halls with her usual boldness, clipboards in hand. Instead, she kept to herself, only emerging occasionally to check her mail or hurriedly carry groceries. A few neighbors confronted her about apologizing to Jacob, but she brushed them off. Pride kept her from admitting wrongdoing publicly. Encouraged by the Nook's success, Linda Hooper proposed an official dedication event, a small ceremony in which the HOA would publicly recognize the Nook as a permanent feature of Greenwood Towers. The plan was simple: a short speech, a ribbon cutting, and a celebratory batch of cookies or lemonade for residents who dropped by. The day of the dedication arrived on a crisp Saturday afternoon. Lydia convinced Jacob to attend, though he was shy about the spotlight. Tasha decorated the Nook's entrance with a festive banner reading "Community Study Nook, Learning Together." Mr. Blakely wore a tie for the occasion, proud of his role as an informal tutor. Around 24 residents gathered. Linda stood near the Nook's entrance, an oversized ribbon strung across the doorway, and spoke briefly about how the building had come together to support each other's academic and personal growth. "This is a shining example," she concluded, "of how small acts of kindness can transform a community." Then she beckoned Jacob forward to cut the ribbon. The boy hesitated, cheeks coloring, but with gentle encouragement, he snipped the ribbon in a single motion. Applause erupted. Lydia, eyes shining with emotion, gave him a quick hug. Tasha snapped photos. Mr. Blakely teased that Jacob could open the next library in town. During the celebration, neighbors mingled, munching on Tasha's homemade cookies. They admired the bulletin board, now filled with bright sticky notes praising the Nook. "Thanks for the quiet space. I got an A on my essay. Couldn't have done it without this." Jacob lingered near the back, feeling both bashful and proud. He recognized that this moment was a direct response to the day Constance flipped his desk. And though she was nowhere to be seen, her name floated in half-joking remarks. "Karen sure missed out on a nice cookie," or, "I guess flipping a desk was the best thing that could have happened for our community," ironically. In that sense, the Study Nook's official dedication symbolized not just a victory for Jacob, but a broader spirit of cooperation and empathy. Greenwood Towers, once overshadowed by petty rule enforcement, had discovered a better version of itself, neighbors helping neighbors, forging connections through the simple act of providing a space to learn. In the weeks after the ribbon cutting, the community study nook thrived. The chairs were regularly occupied by children finishing homework, older residents tackling crosswords, or even working adults who needed a peaceful corner to make phone calls or read. Occasionally, a neighbor would light a gently scented candle on the desk, so long as it didn't violate any fire codes. The area developed a cozy, lived-in feel. Jacob settled into a consistent routine. Most weekdays, from about 5 p.m. to 6 p.m., he'd trot down with a small tote bag of books and pencils. Sometimes Lydia joined him. Other times, he felt comfortable enough alone, surrounded by the friendly hum of washers and the presence of neighbors who looked out for him. His school performance improved, teachers noting his increased focus. Lydia suspected that the supportive environment, where he felt safe and accepted, made all the difference. Constance Adler, for her part, never apologized. She withdrew from her compliance coordinator responsibilities, quietly resigning from that specific role, though she remained on the board in name only. The board rarely sought her input. On the few occasions she passed the study nook, she turned her head away, refusing even to glance at the small desks. Some neighbors pitied her isolation, but few forgot her aggression. Perhaps, in time, she might come around or at least reflect on the outcome of her actions. For now, she seemed intent on distancing herself from the community she tried so hard to control. One late afternoon, Mr. Blakely found Jacob in the nook, reading a library book about famous inventors. The boy looked up with a grin. "Hi, Mr. Blakely. Did you know Thomas Edison had a really hard time in regular school, too? He was homeschooled after a while because he had learning differences." Mr. Blakely nodded, leaning down to glance at the page. "Indeed, I did. You see, Even great minds sometimes need the right environment to flourish. Jacob's gaze flicked around the nook, the desks, the bulletin board with pinned tips, the comforting overhead lights. "I'm glad we have this place," he said softly. Mr. Blakely patted Jacob's shoulder with a grandfatherly smile. "We all are, son." From that perspective, the story of Karen flipping a special needs child's foldable desk ended not in bitterness or defeat, but in a revitalized spirit for Greenwood Towers. One act of hostility had been transformed into a catalyst for compassion. A building once overshadowed by small-minded rule enforcement had discovered the power of neighbors uniting to nurture each other's well-being. Indeed, the homework helper, Nook, became a lasting testament to how adversity can unlock a community's better angels, how cruelty can, ironically, yield something profoundly positive. Years later, newcomers to Greenwood Towers would pass by the study nook and read the bulletin board's cheerful messages, never realizing it began as the site of a conflict. All they saw was a space of quiet encouragement, ready to inspire the next child flipping through a textbook, the next adult reading a novel, or anyone seeking a moment of calm in a busy world. So, while Constance Karen Adler might never rewrite her version of the story, the rest of Greenwood Towers chose to remember it this way. From one neighbor's anger came a shared learning space that brightened the building's heart. And for that, the community was eternally grateful.